So welcome everyone, greetings. My name is Jennifer Thomas, the Membership and Development Coordinator at New Hampshire Audubon. And before we begin the presentation, I'd first like to acknowledge that this presentation is coming to you from our state headquarters in Concord, New Hampshire, which is located within the site of the ancient village of Pennacook in Nadakana, which is the traditional ancestral homeland and waterways of the Abenaki, Pennacook, and Wabanaki peoples past and present. I would like to acknowledge and honor with gratitude the land and waterways and our ancestors who have stewarded the Nadakana throughout the generations for thousands of years. New Hampshire Audubon is honored to continue the stewardship of these lands, providing opportunities for all people to form connections to the natural world through our programs and wildlife sanctuaries around the state. I invite you to learn more about the Indigenous presence on the land you occupy by visiting the website native/land.ca. Here you can explore and click on territories of Indigenous peoples and get connected to resources to learn more. And for a more in-depth understanding of the Granite State, check out indigenousnh.com, including this interactive story map that details the Indigenous presence and their stories here in New Hampshire. Thank you for your interest in tonight's topic, where migratory birds need us most. As some of you may know, because I know a lot of you have joined us for all 20 of them, this talk is the 20th session of a year-long webinar series called Exploring Connections to and Stewardship of the Natural World, supported by a New Hampshire Humanities Council grant. The past recordings of all of these talks can be found on New Hampshire Audubon's YouTube page, which are also linked on the series webpage. Throughout these series, we're exploring the intersection of the sciences and the humanities, finding and forging new ways to connect with nature and learn about the importance of conservation action. I want to invite you to really take the time and space to consider how tonight's topic informs, strengthens, or otherwise supports how you define yourself as a person and how you use this topic to connect with human communities as well as the wild ones. I implore you to reflect on why this topic is important to you in your personal value system and how you can connect with others through this topic in your daily life. Before I hand it over to Diane DeLuca to introduce tonight's presenter, Scott Hecker, I would like to take this opportunity to briefly describe how this webinar fits into the larger mission of New Hampshire Audubon. For those who don't know, New Hampshire Audubon is a state-based environmental nonprofit organization that is completely independent from National Audubon. We rely on members and donors like you to support our charitable mission, which has 4 programmatic pillars: connecting people to nature through environmental education experiences like school programs, nature day camp, and webinars like this; researching and conserving species in peril, including large raptors and small birds; managing about 10,000 acres of wildlife sanctuaries throughout the state for habitat and recreation; and advocating for sound environmental policy in the New Hampshire State Legislature. I am able to be here today because of donors and members like you. We also rely on a huge network of volunteers who assist us with wildlife monitoring, ambassador animal care, environmental education, and wildlife sanctuary management throughout the state. If you already are a volunteer member or supporter of New Hampshire Audubon, I would like to sincerely say thank you. We simply couldn't achieve our mission without you. And if you'd like to become part of our conservation family today, which I certainly hope you will, check out our website for ways to get involved. We do have over 65 people registered for this evening's talk, so you'll see we're in full webinar mode. Please feel free to use the chat function for any thoughts, comments, and reactions you might have, and reserve the Q&A button for any questions that you would like answered by Scott. It's been great to see the geographical reach we've been able to obtain through these webinars. So for fun, try typing into the chat where you're watching this presentation from. And so that others can engage with you, feel free to change where you're sending your chat message to everyone. At this time, I'd like to hand it over to Diane DeLuca, who is the senior biologist responsible for orchestrating this series. Without her leadership and coordination, this webinar series would not happen. Thank you, Diane. She and I will be monitoring both the Q&A here in Zoom, as well as on Facebook Live throughout the evening. We've set the parameters of the Q&A so that other attendees can see all the questions that are being asked and can comment or up the vote if you want to see that question answered. In the event that we have more questions and we have time to answer, this process helps us hone in on what questions we should focus on. That said, don't be shy about asking questions. It's the best way to learn about something new. And without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Diane to introduce this evening's presenter.
Thanks, Jen. I really appreciate your introduction. So we're very pleased to welcome Scott Hecker as our presenter tonight. Scott has worked to conserve threatened bird life for over 40 years. His graduate studies at Antioch University took him to Belize in the 1980s, where he successfully helped establish the largest private tropical forest reserve in Central America. For the next 30 years, he led efforts for the Massachusetts Audubon Society, National Audubon Society, and the Goldenrod Foundation to conserve the nesting habitat of piping plovers, terns, and other beach nesting species. His tenure in Massachusetts helped piping plovers increase from 126 pairs in 1987 to 611 pairs in 2011. He summarized his work in the piping plovers as an umbrella species for the Barrier Beach ecosystem in Saving Biological Diversities, edited by Askins et al. And in 2008, he founded the nonprofit Conservationists, Inc. to develop comprehensive field work to protect plovers and terns on their non-breeding grounds, as well as resident beach nesting species in the Gulf of Mexico and the Bahamas. In 2016, he began his current position as the Director of Bird Conservation for the International Conservation Fund of Canada, where he has broadened his activities to fund and oversee conservation efforts for North America's most threatened migratory birds, as well as globally endangered species occurring within the tropics of Latin America, Africa, and Asia. Scott lives in Temple, New Hampshire, where he serves as the chair of the Conservation Commission and on boards for local nonprofit organizations focused on the conservation and the arts. And tonight, Scott will be giving a presentation on where migratory birds need us most, which will focus on an array of familiar breeding species that undertake the perils of migration, where they go, the threats they face, and what must be done to conserve them. So very excited to have Scott, and thank you.
Good, well, I guess I'll jump right in. There's a lot packed in this tonight, and I wanted to do those poll questions because I'm always curious who has ever heard of the International Conservation Fund of Canada. And I honestly, when I arrived there in 2016, even people in the small village in Nova Scotia where the office is never heard of the International Conservation Fund of Canada. So it was really quite funny at first. And but now, as part of my job, I try to get the name out there a little more often. But anyway, it's basically we're talking about a foundation that started with a couple of people. Yeah, and I'm going to go into the slides because then I can explain more about the background of ICFC. So Ann Lambert and Tom Welch in Nova Scotia. I first interacted with them asking for funds for piping plovers in the Bahamas, and they said they were interested. And so I went up to Nova Scotia and went to the office and joined them in their little place there. And we started talking, and it turns out that Ann Lambert's favorite bird is, you know what, a piping plover. So that was perfect. And so yes, she wanted to help us. So that's what happened in fall of 2015. And the next thing I knew, I was working for them by January 2016. But they were quite quiet about all the work they had been doing, mostly their own funding for, almost 10 years. So even now, I think of us as like the little NGO that could. We only have 5 paid staff, and we're working in 65 projects in 35 countries. And so far we've spent 35 million, but just this year we've increased the amount quite a lot, and I'll get to that later. But the projects protect 441 threatened species, and those are just the ones we know of. And then we created an American International Conservation Fund in 2019 based in Boston. And I helped recruit the board and all of that. So we have a sister organization to take advantage of American donors and things like that too. So we're really growing quickly right now. So my first, my career, I would say, began when I was in high school, probably a sophomore, I guess. And I was recruited to speak at the first Earth Day for our town. And it happened to be just months after or a year after the Cuyahoga River caught on fire, which I think most people know about, at least people my age do. And that's the area where I used to go hiking and take nature photographs. Then when I went on to graduate school, I ended up in New Hampshire. I was at Antioch and Keene. And I was a little different because I told them I really, really want to work in Belize and I want to spend time in Belize. And every class I took, I mean, even geomorphology, which was supposed to be about New England, I twisted around and did a presentation about the geology of Belize instead. But anyway, it was great fun at Antioch and gave me the opportunity to truly get into what I wanted to do. And at that time, I started an internship at Mass Audubon right when they started their interest in Belize. Well, long story short is I spent a few years helping Mass Audubon. And in the end, we were able to purchase 262,000 acres and create the largest private sanctuary in Belize. And then, as it turns out, in Central America. And I'll get into this later, but we came back to that reserve again this year with funding from ICFC, and I'll talk about that again later. So then I spent most of my life really out on the beaches of Massachusetts. Oh, I'd say making friends and making enemies. We really, nothing was being done to protect piping plovers in 1985, 86. And so in 87, when I started, I created the Coastal Waterbird program for Mass Audubon, and we started hiring interns and getting a team out there to find plover nests and start protecting them. And this picture of me is on Plymouth Beach, and the picture next to me is on Plymouth Beach as well, on the 4th of July. And in my little backpack was my first daughter, who happens to be from Belize. But anyway, over the time that we created the Coastal Waterbird program and so much interest developed around the piping plover with the state and other people, it really was amazing. I mean, truly. It was only a few years in before we started to see the increases. And then every year after like 1992 or 3, they just kept going up. And even now, I mean, even today, the numbers again have gone even higher. I believe it's over 800 pairs now. Well, like I said, piping plovers sort of helped connect me to ICFC. And it just so happened that that year was the time that Ann Lambert, the founder, really wanted to do something about shorebirds. And so she hired Patricia Gonzalez in Argentina, who was working on red knots. And a couple of months later, I came on board. So Patricia was overseeing the actual field work in Argentina. And my job was to develop the program and make decisions about which projects we should fund and how to grow the program in a way that would do the most good for shorebirds. And it's been, I mean, honestly, it's been wonderful. You know, shorebirds are in very bad trouble. There was a New York Times piece about that in 2018, that many face extinction. The worst conditions for shorebirds are in the Asian, Australasian flyway, where there's probably 15 species that are endangered. And it's a very dismal situation. But I also have recent news, as of actually this week, that there's a commitment to spend $5 billion in that flyway to protect shorebirds. So that's a really wonderful thing. So, you know, as we all know, we're seeing more often headlines that are pretty scary for birds and wildlife, just extinction, things like that. I mean, the first big ones were things like North America's lost 3 billion birds in the past 50 years. Then World Wildlife had a report, 2/3 of wildlife have vanished since 1970. 1 million species faced extinction, according to the UN. And the insect apocalypse we're really starting to see now. And then climate change is no longer some far off problem. It is happening now. And that was Barack Obama a couple of years ago. But on the other side of the coin, we have people like E.O. Wilson, who are, you know, working to save half the planet. You know, he says that's what we have to do. And that's the mission. And there was another person up in Canada named Harvey Locke, and he did something similar. It's called Nature Needs Half. And because we're a Canadian nonprofit, we're part of that. That we're more connected to that. I should say we're also part of E.O. Wilson's too, but we're part of the Nature Needs Half. And, you know, for example, we have a project on the Amazon that protects 25 million acres. That's a nice sized piece of property or land. And that's what the Kayapo. So, you know, lots of interest right now in large scale conservation, indigenous people. I mean, I'm an optimist, so I think things are going well. Here's a page showing our actual project in the Amazon. You can see it's very large. It's bigger than Vancouver Island. It's bigger than Manhattan Island. I forget what else I can compare it to. It's bigger than most of the national parks in the United States combined. That's actually a good way to put it. I mean, if you think of all the big national parks in the US and you combine them, this is bigger than that. We have different categories like land conservation, which is what I was just talking about, but also threatened species. And we do focus on many of the world's most endangered species. One of those would be the desert elephant of Mali. And our work there was extremely successful with our anti-poaching team, as you can see here at the bottom. And so in 2017, we were awarded the Equator Prize by the United Nations. But unfortunately, this past year, our leader was murdered in Burkina Faso when he was on patrol. So that work continues, but we lost Rory Young this year. We have another category, which, you know, many organizations either focus on land or sea. Well, we do both. And marine conservation is something that we look at particularly from the point of view of damage to the marine environment. And trawling, of course, is one of the worst things. And we heard from somebody in Cambodia who wanted to protect an area from trawlers. And that has been a rapidly growing program within ICFC. And Dr. Sylvia Earle supports that, and she named our place there in Cambodia Hope Spot. And there's a really good 90-minute documentary film called Current Sea, which is about this program. And it won awards in the film festivals. And I really recommend that everybody should see the movie Current Sea. So in my information at the end of the program, there will be links for all these types of things. So the ICFC approach is kind of specialized. we look for in-country NGOs. We want to work with those people on the ground that know the communities and all of that. But our goal is to reverse species declines, population declines, protect both marine and terrestrial habitats, and increase small NGO effectiveness to sustain long-term action. The type of things we support are land acquisition, salaries of staff engaged in conservation action, field equipment, supplies, and even endowment funds for projects that we really are behind. And one of the things that's unique about ICFC is that we almost never drop a project. I mean, it's rare that we drop a project unless it's either completed or not. If it's not, we continue for years. So many of our projects have been going since 2007, 2010. That's why we have endowments for those, some of those. The reasoning behind what we actually choose would be species or biodiversity vulnerability, species richness, the existing threats. I mean, sometimes threats come out of nowhere, and ICFC is so small that we can make decisions about our projects literally in one day. We do not have to go through a board of directors to make our decisions and that. If it's a large project, we do go through the board, but generally speaking, we can fund something the day that we hear about it if we really think it's urgent. Trusted field partners, that's critical. There are a lot of opportunities out there to support conservation work, and we try to find people that we really believe are knowledgeable and trustworthy and passionate about their work, and the degree of integration with local communities is critical. Within my program, bird conservation, I have three categories: globally threatened birds, those that are the most endangered in the world. Again, only in the tropics, by the way, and we focus in the most biodiverse part of the planet. Canadian and US endangered species, and declining shorebirds at globally significant sites. And that's because so many shorebirds are declining. I mean, that as a category, many shorebirds are in decline. Things that we have always thought of as common. I could give you an example, something like the lesser yellowlegs. So there's a lot of problems for shorebirds, and we're tackling our work in those three areas. Among the globally endangered species, like I said, these are rare birds. There's only 100 pairs known of the blue-throated macaw, and they're only in one part of Bolivia. So working there, we've been buying land to buy virtually as much of the wintering and breeding habitat we can for this species. We have other colleagues or peer organizations that are helping, of course. We're restoring habitat, erecting nest boxes, and the population is increasing. I mean, it's really been successful. Another really tough one is the hooded grebe. It's a bird that lives on, let's just say, a small number, anywhere from a dozen to 20 something lakes in Patagonia. And that bird is in serious trouble because the introduced mink, from North America is really spreading all over Patagonia. And it's something it didn't evolve with. And one mink, for example, killed 50 adult birds in one night. So we have a mink eradication program, and also North American trout, similar problem. Luckily, though, the birds are they're on these kettle hole-like ponds. In other words, no streams going in or out. That helps a little bit, but it's a tough one to save. The species wasn't even known until 1974. We're working on them both at the breeding grounds as well as the wintering grounds. This is certainly one of my stranger birds, and I have not seen it myself, but the Malayo is only found on the island of Sulawesi. And people like David Attenborough will do profiles on this, because this is a bird with its mate, seeks out warm sand, either on a beach or in a geothermal area, digs a hole in the sand about 1 meter deep and lays one big egg. And then it buries its egg, and some of the colonies might have 20 or 30 of these pairs and stuff, and they bury that egg way down there. And it takes 90 days for the egg to hatch. That's really a long time. But when it hatches, the bird, the chick, is fully fledged and can actually fly. So it's just one of those miracles of nature. One of the things we do with the communities there is a lot of theater, and people act out all these roles and things with Malayo's. We also protect sea turtles and those flying fox type bats and two or three other really endangered mammals. And a lot of really great things happen with traveling theater from community to community. The Bengal florican is one of the rarest birds in the world. They've really declined in India, Nepal, and Cambodia. And in the case of Nepal, we have honestly a very impressive project. We're protecting a wildlife corridor from Koshi Tapu, the biggest wetland in Nepal, all the way to the top of the third highest mountain in the world. It's 250 kilometers. And down at the bottom, the Koshi Tapu, this past year, we bought a lot of land to buy up habitat where the birds are actually nesting, because there's only about maybe 12 pairs around Koshi Tapu, and that's considered one of the bigger sites that's left. So, we're trying everything we can. We do both land acquisition and grassland management and things like that. A very big problem in the South Pacific and any place where there are islands or island birds is introduced species like rats and snakes and even cane toads and things like that. So we have a partnership with a group in Polynesia that's part of BirdLife. And for the last few years, we've been eradicating all of these non-native animals that are on these islands to save actually quite a few species. I'm going to guess 10 species anyway, that are on the verge of extinction. One of the projects that I looked into and brought to ICFC was the working on the spoonbill sandpipers. That is the most endangered migratory shorebird in the world. And, I used to think there was nothing cuter than a piping plover chick. Well, I'm not so sure now. There could be. And so this bird, there's one breeding site known on the Siberian coast of Russia, where they have a Head Start program to collect eggs and incubate them. And it's really, really helping. I mean, they're doubling the number of fledglings leaving that breeding site every year for quite a few years now. And we are trying to find another breeding site up there. But my work and my funding with ICFC focuses on the real problem, which is on the wintering grounds, where these birds are eaten just like any other shorebird. For example, in South China, there are thousands and thousands of nets on the coast that look just like mist nets. They're the same exact thing, but they're used to catch and eat all shorebirds. So now I'm going to talk about the big picture and work my way back to the Western Hemisphere. These are the flyways of the world. And as I mentioned early on, the East Asia Australasian flyway is by far the most damaged, the most, the biggest problem for migratory shorebirds. And there's a lot of new work going on to help a dozen species that are endangered. Over here in the Americas, we have sort of three major flyways: the Atlantic, the Mid-Country, and the Pacific. And our shorebird initiative focuses primarily on Latin America right now. So this is the story that was in Science magazine about how we're losing birds by the billions. And it gives you an idea of what they mean. I mean, 4 billion birds go south from Canada, 3.5 billion are 4.7 billion birds go south from Canada and the US combined into Mexico, but only 3.5 billion come back to the US, and then only 2.6 billion back to Canada. And we can't, I don't think we can say that the difference between the US number and the Canada number means that they were lost in the US. Some of the birds that go back to Canada, or many of them, are coming back from Latin America directly to Canada. The state of the birds types of documents are being done everywhere. And the Canada State of the Birds one was revised in 2019. Roughly speaking, 75% of Canada's 451 bird species migrate south of Canada. And many of the long distant migrants are suffering the steepest declines. Here's a few schematics to show. From Canada, 23% go to Mexico and Central America and the Caribbean, and 15% go to South America. The ones in South America on the graph on the right, they've declined by over 50%. Those long distant migrants are declining the most, and Central America's next. That's where the real declines are occurring. New Hampshire State of the Birds has a couple of bar graphs in it that also kind of reflect a similar story. The farther the species migrates, the more likely it is to have a population decline. More than half of the shorebirds and the aerial insectivores species are in either steep or moderate decline. So the ICFC plan, that we're working on all the time, involves land conservation. Just remember, even though it may not be a critical site for some specific thing, like we'll talk about later, for example, like the cerulean warbler or something like that. The project in the Amazon that we have is 11 million hectares, and that is just huge and full of birds. So land conservation, especially on a large scale, is good for many, many migratory birds. Threatened species, I like to talk about the umbrella effect of any species we're protecting, because I did write a paper about that, as the piping plover is an umbrella species for the barrier beach ecosystem. And in most cases, any bird that we get attention or funding for that we protect is protecting a large number of species of birds or even other kinds of things. The Shorebird Initiative is focusing on the most endangered or more endangered shorebirds at the most important sites, meaning the biggest and hosting the most birds. But we only fund on the ground conservation where we have wardens, fencing, legal authority, anything to do to actually protect either the bird or its habitat. That is where our funding goes. Declining neotropical migrants is a lot trickier. They, generally speaking, they require much larger areas than shorebirds. Shorebirds are concentrated in, like at the wizard sites and that type of thing. But neotropical migrants, even when they have a small range, are usually spread over a pretty big area. And what's really nice right now, and for the last several years, is tracking technology and eBird both are providing much more information for us to know exactly where we should start when it comes to conserving habitat. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to, whoops. And then last, I mentioned community-based conservation. We really like to work with the local communities, and in particular with indigenous communities, which actually hold. I saw a figure, I think even today, that something like indigenous territories hold 80% of the biodiversity on the planet, something like that. I was really struck. I mean, but we do focus on their areas. This is the paper that I referred to about the piping plover, and there's a link for that at the end of my information. So ICFC is working in probably 35 or 40 projects right now in Latin America and the Caribbean. I think it's roughly 14 or 15 countries. And those projects can be anything to do with biodiversity. Almost all of them are terrestrial, but we do have, I think, 2 marine conservation projects in Costa Rica and Brazil. This is another map that shows where the Western Hemisphere Shorebird Reserve Network is, which is growing all the time. There are now 112 sites that are really important to shorebirds in 18 countries. They have 430 partners like, NGOs, research people, things like that. And then they estimate that it's roughly 38 million acres of shorebird habitat. Well, I can also say there are many places in addition to those sites that are important. And many of those sites, as much as they're described as, wizard sites, what matters is if they're truly protected on the ground, both the birds and the habitat. And we look at those carefully to see if there's new projects for us to do. Now I have a couple of lists of species for you. So we have the US and Canada threatened birds that are in Latin America and the Caribbean. So we have the roseate tern, piping plover, red knot, cerulean warbler, Bicknell's thrush, bobolink, Canada warbler, eastern whippoorwill, buff-breasted sandpiper, and common nighthawk. 7 of these 10 species winter primarily in South America. New Hampshire's list has piping plover, roseate tern, red knot, least tern, upland sandpiper, common tern, pied-billed grebe, peregrine falcon, common loon, northern harrier, common nighthawk, purple martin, cerulean warbler, grasshopper sparrow, eastern meadowlark, cliff swallow. I think rusty blackbird should be on there too. But the bold-faced ones are the ones that are in South America. And the ones with asterisks are the ones that are only 2 or 3 that are listed both in the United States and Canada. So these are all high priority birds for us. So now I'm going to go right into the projects. My work started at ICFC with piping plovers, so we'll start there. Our work in the Bahamas focuses on the wintering habitat of piping plovers. And I remember back, maybe back around 2006 or something, we had no idea how many piping plovers were in the Bahamas. I mean, it actually, the international surveys had numbers on the order of 23 piping plovers in the Bahamas, things like that. And then one person, Sidney Maddock, went down there and he found 400 and some piping plovers on his vacation in one little trip. And after that, we started looking in the Bahamas, and the number is definitely over 1,500 piping plovers. And that represents 18% of the global population and 35% of its Eastern North American population. So our work there is aboard a schooner. We rent a schooner every year. It sleeps like 20 people maybe. And we spend all of our time in the month of May, about the piping plovers are mostly gone by then, but we spend all of our time posting breeding sites of Wilson's plovers, oyster catchers, least terns, roseate terns, which are also the same sites that are used by wintering piping plovers. And the signs we put in are meant to last as long as possible. I mean, there's a particular design, I won't go into that, but they're there when the piping plovers come back. And the other thing that's critically important, and it's really a much bigger thing we do, is we kill and eradicate Australian pine, which is overtaking all of the beaches of the Bahamas. You can see in the background of that picture in the bottom there, that's all Australian pine on the coast, and it eliminates the beach. So it has to go. We have crews of volunteers from the Bahamas, and we have the people on the schooner that are helping out. So the people that go on the schooner pay a stipend to be on it, but then they go and they kill these trees, and they help us find all the nests of Wilson's plovers and terns and things. And we have about 600 pairs of Wilson's plovers nesting there. I've been on the trip twice. It's a fantastic experience. If you are interested, contact me. And I was so happy to see the roseate terns breeding in the Bahamas too. I mean, one of my favorite birds. I took this in my first day practically working at Mass Audubon at Bird Island, Massachusetts. And ever since then, I fell in love with a bird I'd never seen before. Their migration is very complicated. A lot of work has been done in the last 10 years to figure out where they're going. Prior to that 10 years, no one knew where roseate terns went. And it turns out, pun, I guess, play on words, they're on the coast of Brazil. And some of them stop and maybe stay in Guyana and other parts of Brazil. But there's really no on the ground protection of the roseate tern at this time. And I'm looking for a field partner there. One of my friends, John Atwood, who some of you probably know, he and I were talking back around 2012 about how I found bird bands on roseate terns in a birding site called Wiki Aves in Brazil. And I just couldn't believe my eyes. I mean, I'm going through photos in Wiki Aves and seeing all of our roseate terns that are color banded in these photos. And that was one of the things that really helped figure out where the roseate terns are. Well, then John started looking at the least tern photos in Brazil. Same thing happened. And he did this poster on it in 2012. And least terns were actually kind of a mystery because they're hard to tell apart from other species there. And now we know much more about the least tern. One of our primary focal species is the red knot. And I think most of you know that they've declined precipitously. And shorebirds are one of those things, when the number gets too low, you really have to worry about extinction. And ICFC has been working on red knots since the beginning. So we have major projects on that. We are funding we funded the Motus Towers in Tierra del Fuego. And they were the first ones in Tierra del Fuego. And then we also funded the annual aerial surveys by Guy Morrison, who's been doing them for 25 or 30 years there. And he's personally witnessed that drop from 50,000 red knots down to where it is now, which is around 11,700 or so from 2 years ago. Patricia her whole life has been dedicated to the red knot. And she's the person who, found that bird that they determined, I'll get to it in the next slide, but that has flown to the, distance-wise to the moon and back with all of its migrations. So it's called Moonbird, and there's books and movies. And it was a famous red knot. Here's a picture of the actual bird and B95. And Patricia is still there in the same place in Argentina, protecting red knots with a wonderful team of people. I visited them, and it really, the people doing this work inspire me to do as much as I can. And I had a lot of experience with things like dogs and cars on beaches and all that. So I was able to help them in, more ways than just funding. This is a picture of some of the rangers that work there. And this is really far down there. There are no trees or anything, very few. It's pretty far south. This past year, we started funding work in Baja for the Rosalari red knot. And I couldn't believe it and couldn't resist. I mean, you see all those cars on the beach down there, and the team that protects them is all women. And there's a couple of men involved, but the reason it's all women is because the men were really being kind of assaulted. The people like to drive on the beach, and there's this fish that they take the bladders from and sell to China, and the bladders can be as much as $3,000 for these fish. So it got very aggressive. There was actually drug cartels and things involved. Well, the women are much safer because they don't like to hurt the women. And they did a fantastic job, and they patrol 4 kilometers of beach, protecting the grunion sardine type thing that lays, millions of eggs. And that's why the red knots are there. So that's a really important place for 9,000 red knots. Another interesting species is the Buff-breasted Sandpiper. They travel down the midsection of the United States, and they have a fall flyway that goes one way, and then the northbound flyway is not the same place, but on the southerly route, 2,000 buff-breasted sandpipers stop at a reserve that we bought land for called Barba Azul. And Barba Azul is doing a fantastic job. They have a small number of cattle. They're doing all kinds of experiments with grazing heights, the grass heights with the grazing and all that. And it's working. They've worked with other people in South America that are also specializing in this kind of study to determine what's good for buffies, as we call them, and also upland sandpipers and golden plovers and things like that. They all have different requirements. These species are not quite as endangered, the Hudsonian Godwit and the whimbrel, but we have a lot of work going into those 2 species. It was exciting this year. I'm sure some of you saw the video that's on YouTube about the 20,000 whimbrels they found on a little island off the coast of South Carolina. That video is fantastic. I forgot to put that in my links. But we work in the places where these birds go. Well, one of them is around Chiloé Island in Chile, and the other is Tierra del Fuego. So we have a project in Chile, and I've watched this project grow rapidly from 5 little bird sanctuaries in this town called Magin that were only 918 hectares. But the guy leading that, Claudio Delgado, he has done a phenomenal job. And he's expanded his area of protection now to over 8,000 hectares. It's the entire river valley, all the way back to those volcanoes you can see in that photograph, working with the indigenous people and everything. I'm just, wow, And so great project. They have really good birding trails and things like that. This is one of the observation blinds that you go to by boat at high tide. I don't think you can even get there at low tide. But we helped them, we paid for those to be built, and the public's very, very engaged in bird ecotourism in this particular place. Sometimes some little thing comes in the door, like they said they needed the funding to map an area on Mar Chiquita, which is one of the most important sites in the entire Western Hemisphere for shorebirds. And if they could get the mapping done and all of that, it was going to expand the size of the new national park by hundreds of hectares. So we helped pay for the surveys and everything. And there are millions of shorebirds. I mean, Wilson's phalaropes, golden plovers, lesser yellow legs, 300,000 flamingos. I mean, it's a great place. So now let's drill down a little bit on some of these songbirds and things like that. This is a map produced in Canada, and it shows 75 priority species combined from Quebec, which is, a bordering area for us, to, where they go in migration in winter. And those really, really dark areas is where most of them go. If you're going to save these species, I mean, literally, you have to work in these places. Taking one species, the Canada warbler, again, well, okay, let me say, the map shows where 80% of Canada's forest birds go. But that circle shows, in fact, where the Canada warbler goes in that one spot. This is actually the exact spot that bird goes. And those are sightings and things. Data collected just on the Canada warbler. That's it for the Canada warbler. I mean, that's the entire wintering area and a little piece of Colombia. So we have similar problems, you know, with the Bicknell's thrush. I think most of you have heard about the small area in the Dominican Republic that the bird goes. Very few birds outside of the Dominican Republic. A few in Cuba, Jamaica, Puerto Rico, but all of the Bicknell's thrush, you know, and on the big map at the top, mostly that are found in Canada, go to that little area. This I just put in the talk today. I was working on the talk today, and my friend Meade Godot at the Harris Center said, "Oh, you should put in the thing about the broad-winged hawks." I said, okay. So I went to the Harris Center's website, and this shows a bunch of GPS tagged broad-winged hawks, you know, from I think, yeah, this year, going south. And it just reinforces this thing that sometimes birds travel in very narrow corridors and they winter in very small places altogether. Here's actually the birds that, two of the birds that were tagged, Harris and Monadnock, at the, you know, right here in the Monadnock. I'm sorry, I live in the Monadnock area, right here where I live. And it shows where they are as of today. That's from November 17th. Today, they were in Northwest Colombia, and that's how they got there. So, Panama, you know, it's an isthmus and it's narrow, and lots of birds go through that. And then some of them go across the Caribbean over Cuba and other islands in the Caribbean, and they land or they take off from Santa Marta in Colombia, a tiny place that is absolutely critically important for migratory songbirds going to and from North America. The map on the right is in Panama, and that's where that other arrow is pointing. The white area is not disturbed or not forested. That's the Wunan indigenous territory. And I went down there before we were funding them and all, and I went on by boat and dugout canoe and all that to get there. And when I got there, the first thing I learned, I went to community meetings and things like that. And they were really into birds. All these people, one girl who was around 16 told me that she doesn't have an education, but birds are the way for her to develop her mind. I mean, I was just, wow. You know, had to do something to help that project. And so this past year, we did fund the Wunan to protect their territory from illegal logging, mainly, that's going on all around them. And you can see all that red is where things are being destroyed. And we're using satellite technology and, you know, people on the ground and legal people, et cetera. And we have really hit the ground running this year with a bunch of cases in court, and it's going very well. Here's the team, one of the teams. I went to 3 communities, and each community has its own birding team. And one of them is the blue tanagers, one's the brown pelicans, and the other one's the black morapendulas. So, you know, like the brown pelicans are the Pelicanos chocolate. But these teams compete against each other during the Christmas bird count, and it was great. It was a wonderful place to go. They're protecting 55,000 acres. This is a map that's, I think, amazing, and again, totally reinforces this issue that birds spread all over the United States and North America end up going to places that are tiny by comparison from where they came from. So an Ohio State paper or project that was in the Condor, they tagged 6 prothonotary warblers in those states: Wisconsin, Ohio, Virginia, South Carolina, Arkansas, and Louisiana. And all of them went to the Magdalena Valley in Colombia. They all went there. And those are the GPS lines and things that they, the geolocator lines that they used to get there. I mean, well, bird people anyway, we've all heard about cerulean warblers. That was the first one that came up about this whole thing of narrow ranges and things. And it's also narrow from the point of view of actual elevation. They're only found between 1,600 feet and 6,000 feet in the Andes. And that's it. That's where all of them go. And one of the things that's going on, in addition to trying to prevent forest loss, is forest restoration. And ICFC and our colleagues, also support lots of projects that have to do with restoration of habitat too. Once we know what the birds need, we can do that as well. I thought the wood thrush was interesting. I went online just to pull up the eBird data on where they winter. I mean, you narrow the data down to just December to January or something like that to make sure you're getting wintering data. And I got that map. Well, on the right there with the purple. Belize is just plastered with wood thrush data. And this was wonderful because my first project that I did back in graduate school was to protect a very big area where I used to see a lot of wood thrushes. And this past year has been fantastic for Belizean conservation. In April, an area the same size that we protected back then with Mass Audubon and the Nature Conservancy was also protected by the Nature Conservancy this year with contributing funders to protect another 250,000 acres that actually are abutting property. Here's the big map. So all of that green is part of the Maya biosphere forest. That big orange block is the new piece from this year. That's 250,000 acres. And the green piece right above it is the part that was protected back when I was there in the early days in the 90s. And so Belize has now become officially the state with the highest percentage of protected land in the country for Latin America. This is a little close-up of some of that we were just talking about. Now on this map, the thing that was an orange block is now green, and the Rio Bravo area that I worked on is the part above it. ICFC just donated $500,000 towards that orange piece that's in the middle there. That's another 30,000 acres that was protected this year as a corridor. We're trying to create corridors between the Maya forest. I'll go back actually. You can see we need corridors, if possible, between the orange block and that big block down below in Belize. And we're trying to go right down the middle there. You can see that there. So in addition to protecting all of our migratory birds, where they are, it's a good thing to look at maps like this. This is bird species per square kilometer in those places. And those same places where the migratory birds have their needs are where these other bird species and resident species are found as well. So it's a win-win or a twofer or whatever you want to call it. Also, the IUCN's Red Book, which shows where the world's most endangered birds are, again, it's overlapping all the same areas. And then there's other things like small range birds, things that are not yet endangered, but they have tiny breeding range and they're endemic, to little places. If those aren't watched in advance, that they could be, lost in a short period of time. I mean, it depends on how small the area is, but some areas are tiny where there are rare species of hummingbirds and things like that. So I'm saying, bird conservation is harder than ever. And, our migratory birds spend not only half of the year, but 3/4 of the year far from the breeding grounds in areas that are much smaller and much more development, in higher concentration. So they're more endangered and more vulnerable down there. And there's much less money or fewer dollars to protect them in these places. So we we as North Americans, we have to play a bigger role to save these things down there. Yeah, well, I'll continue. Like I said before, we're learning such great detail from things like the MODIS wildlife tracking system, which I know New Hampshire Audubon and the Harris Center and other places are getting involved with here in New Hampshire. This kind of information is going to greatly increase the odds that we can do a better job protecting these birds and, you know, and butterflies. And, you know, you can put those on pretty small things. I took this off the MODIS site just to give you an update. I you know, for those that know, you have the MODIS by the numbers, and then you have the map showing where the MODIS receivers are. And I mean, it was just only 5 or 6 years ago that there were virtually none at all in South America. They're popping up, and ICFC's been involved in some of those. But here's the numbers. So MODIS receivers are on 4 of the 7 continents, 31 countries. There's 1,278 MODIS receiver stations. 264 species are tagged. 30,000 or so animals, birds, et cetera, are tagged. 447 research projects, 1,198 MODIS partners and collaborators, and 130 publications. You know, I think MODIS is really important. So now last, I'm gonna sort of wrap up with a couple of things. One, I told you before, or mentioned that the spoonbill sandpiper is the world's most endangered migratory shorebird. And in fact, I'm very, very interested in the project in Russia, and I was supposed to go to Russia this summer to the site, but they invited me to come and we're going to pay my way to go. So, but I couldn't go because of COVID, but it is postponed till this upcoming summer, June 26th. It's a very, very small window because the area of the coast has ice and things, and it's one of those places that you have to have ice breaking ships to get to. So anyway, I mean, even the adults, I'm going to say, are pretty adorable. Here they are. The breeding range is that area of Russia, but that's really misleading because we only know one site in that whole thing where they're found. That's all we got. And then there's the wintering area down below, and the blue and the green area is where we're working with our projects in. We're working just in Thailand, Myanmar, Bangladesh, and China. But there's such a huge interest in this bird by all of the bird clubs and the bird, protection agencies of government, and a lot of work is going into protecting the species now. We have a person named Siam Chowdhury. He's not really associated with a nonprofit. He is the assistant coordinator of the Spoon-billed Sandpiper Task Force. And so, we send funds not only to nonprofits, but we send funds to Siam, and he distributes the funds to 4 mini nonprofits, or not even nonprofits, but community groups and things like that. And we've greatly increased our funding for this project over the last few years. And Siam is one of those amazing people he's all over the planet. And this is one of the things he's protecting. Those are the sites that we're funding right now. We have a couple of them in Bangladesh, and 1 in Myanmar, 1 in Thailand, and 2 in China. This bird, this is really very, I'm going to just say it's cool. The world's smallest satellite transmitter is on this bird, and we can tell where that bird is every day. The transmitters are put on in the Yellow Sea, and then off they go south. And this has helped us pinpoint all of the places that they winter. I forget how many total have been done, but there's only one person that the guy who makes the transmitters in California allows to put on the bird. So because he's concerned about the birds' health and stuff. And so the transmitters cost $5,000 or $4,000. They're glued on the back, on the feathers. They're not attached any other way, just glue on the feathers. And the problem is, of course, we lose those transmitters within 3 months usually because of the molt, and they're gone. But we have people that are helping. We just keep buying them and putting them out there. The hunting on the wintering grounds is the problem. They use nets and snares and this and that, any way they can to catch these things, little tiny birds, shorebirds, and they sell them in the markets and all of that. And our approach is to find the most important sites and then help people that are surviving off shorebirds to change their food. In other words, we offer them opportunities to go into agriculture, like growing watermelons or rice or whatever, and pay for things to help them have a better survival. Well, I'll give you an example. Refrigerators to put fish in, because they don't have refrigerators. So fish needs to be preserved when you catch it, and it just helps them have a better living. And then, of course, the people that are poaching and stuff like that, they can become wardens. So that's the kind of thing that's being done. There's an actual spoonbill sandpiper in one of the hunters' nets, and then the people letting it go free. Vivian Fu, she's a young woman in China, and she was doing things on her own, and Siam said, "You've got to do something for Vivian." And so what I saw was a film that Vivian had already made called Saving the Spoonbill Sandpiper. And I'll talk about it in a couple of minutes at the end here. We're almost, we're finishing up. But Vivian was a one-person, hurricane going through the coast of China and getting the government to stop the misnetting of shorebirds. And she single-handedly collected 2,366 misnets in 1 year. I mean, it's great. So the people sign livelihood agreements to say that they're going to stop hunting the spoonbill sandpiper and do these other things for their lives. So in Thailand, we heard about some land available to purchase in a salt, what do you call artisanal salt area. And it had a lot of spoonbill sandpipers in it. So the Rainforest Trust bought it. They sort of broke free from their usual, mostly rainforest type projects. And they purchased this little area of 8 hectares. And ICFC helps fund the management and protection of the birds there. Now, this is the actual movie that, let's see, I can't see the time. Let's see. Oh, we're over time. Okay, I'm not going to show the movie. You can see the movie on your own. It's just one of the best things I've ever seen. Vivian had children in 8 countries color the individual pages to make an animated movie about saving the spoonbill sandpiper. I'm telling you, you will not believe it. So extinction's not an option. We're going to keep going on that. So now I'm going to talk about how we collaborate with our other people. This is important because historically in the last, 50 years or so, most nonprofits are out there on their own doing really excellent work, but there really is a need, and there's more of a need to collaborate and pool knowledge and funding and all of those things to do more projects together. So we're involved in something new, I'll get to that. So, for example, in land acquisition, we kept noticing that the Rainforest Trust and the American Bird Conservancy and World Land Trust and people like that were contributing to the same things we were. Well, that was before we started talking to them. Then the same thing with projects like the NMBCA funding for Chile and things like that. And we learned that we can help match those funds, that type of thing. We also have an official partnership with the Western Hemisphere Shorebird Group. We pretty much manage their income and their expenses through a fund with ICFC in Canada, and help them raising funds for their organization and things like that. But that's really the research core of people working on shorebirds in Latin America. And then this, about a year or so ago, we formed a consortium, an informal consortium of the leaders of the Rainforest Trust, Rewild, American Bird Conservancy, World Land Trust, IUCN Netherlands, ICFC, meets with these people by Zoom every month to discuss the opportunities in land conservation. We do these things together now. And then last but not least, my boss, or the founder of ICFC, has really tried hard to get the Canadian government more engaged in conservation, especially biodiversity, outside the boundaries of Canada. Well, she wrote and published a 35-page document, and mainly criticizing Canada for being so low in funding for biodiversity outside the country. And here it shows the ranking. Canada was 22 in funding biodiversity outside the country. And, Iceland and places like that are way ahead of, and I'm talking about actual dollars, not only ahead of Canada, but United States is down there at 13 too. So this was really an interesting document, and you can get it off our website. And then now I'm just coming up to this week, last week, at the COP26 conference, Canada's government pledged or will allocate 20% of its $5.3 billion international climate finance money to nature-based solutions in these developing countries. That's big. And then my bosses, they decided to increase the funding of our work, doubling it from 5 million a year to 10 million a year. And we pledge 100 million in the next 10 years to do biodiversity conservation. So we're always looking for new ideas and people and projects that have passion to protect nature in the tropics. And I encourage you to let people know that we exist. And, some of the things that are kind of wonderful are that ICFC doesn't charge any overhead at all. Nothing on any money that's given to us. We pass it directly to the country, to the project, without taking a penny. And we also have an American version as well now. And we provide long-term funding for these groups, and we can make decisions quickly on anything that comes to us. And thank you to our partners. We have many, many more partners than this. These are mostly the Latin American partners, but we have, in fact, more now. This slide is outdated every few months. And so thank you for listening.
Thanks, Scott. That was great. A few questions, and some you somewhat answered as you moved in the presentation, but a question: how are you protecting so much land, such as the Amazon, compared to much bigger organizations like the Nature Conservancy?
Well, I can't compare how many dollars go from organizations to different places, but I can tell you that, number one, we look for opportunities to protect land two ways: actual acquisition, which would be through local nonprofits in the countries. We don't own the land, we buy it for other nonprofits. I forget the exact total of acreage that we've done, but it's probably nothing like the Nature Conservancy. I just can't compare because I don't know what they've done exactly. But on the other hand, we fund, I'll just give the example of the Kayapo. The Kayapo is a group of 8,000 indigenous people in that part of the Amazon. And by funding them fully, we really, really fund their work. And we've brought in we've brought in millions of dollars from other sources as well. They're protecting 25 million acres. That is a very big piece of land. We do the same thing in Peru. And in Africa, in some places, we have some of the biggest reserves in Africa. So I don't know how it compares to other people. I just know that these are big things.
Scott, how do you connect with the locals to collaborate and partner on projects?
Number one, we just insist that the funding go to, it goes to a local nonprofit. We don't pass money. We don't fund North American nonprofits. We fund small nonprofits in the country. So one way or another, they have to come to us, whether they're introduced to us or not. And we work out all the details on who's going to be in charge of signing the contract for the money. And, we wire funds twice a year to each place. And we have not had any negative experiences. I mean, you would think you might, but this is not, we've had, really positive experiences. So by working with the local communities right from the very beginning, that's just where it all is. It's either an indigenous community or a local nonprofit.
That's great. So there's some specific questions. How much funding does ICFC award on an annual basis?
How much what?
How much funding does ICFC award on an annual basis?
In the total amount?
Yeah.
Yeah, probably. So it's roughly 5 million or so. It could be even 7. We have funds that are not in the main books because they're already set up as endowment funds. We don't count those. For example, we have, a couple million anyway, in a project in Peru protecting the Madre Dios area. That's a separate fund. And but our commitment as of last week is that we are now going to spend 10 million a year. That's our new number.
That's great. How do you pay for your overhead expenses if donations go 100% to projects?
Yeah, a few individuals on the board pay that entirely out of their own pockets. It's separate.
That's amazing.
But don't forget, though, I will say it's a small number of staff, and we only have 5 paid staff.
Right.
It's not a very big number.
You do
Okay,
amazing work by collaborating, that's for sure. So what are some of the most important actions individuals in New Hampshire can take to protect, quote unquote, our birds on the wintering grounds?
Well, I think the only way to protect our birds on the wintering grounds is to fund the work on the wintering grounds. But up here, I work, with the Conservation Commission in Temple, New Hampshire, and I'm pushing forward on a bunch of pollinator garden things and stuff like that. And I was really inspired when I saw Doug Talame's lecture about creating what he calls the homegrown national park of 25 million acres of people all doing things to protect their own backyards. And, you might not think that that's really a big thing, but the way he presents on that, it's pretty big. So trying to replace non-native species and literally grow biodiversity in your own yard, even in the city, is a good thing too. But the only way to protect birds on the wintering grounds is to fund the work on the wintering grounds.
Thanks, Scott. Scott, this was great. We really appreciate you sharing all this information with us, and it's amazing work. And Jem will just say a few words as we close. So thank you again.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Scott. And thank you to all who tuned in tonight for your interest in our Exploring Connection series, hosted by New Hampshire Audubon and supported by the New Hampshire Humanities Council. We will be sending out a link to an evaluation survey for this webinar, along with all of the resources that Scott shared, so look out for that. Your feedback is important to us as we continue to host these types of talks, so it's really helpful in reporting back to our funder as well. The next talk in the series will take place on December 8th regarding old growth forests, biodiversity and carbon storage powerhouses worth saving. Please visit our website to register for that and for all of the rest of the upcoming talks in the series. And thank you again, Scott, for presenting this evening. And thank you, Diane, for organizing the series. And thank you all for tuning in and learning alongside with us this evening. We look forward to seeing you again at a webinar in the near future. And for ways to get involved as a member, volunteer, or donor, please visit us at newhampshireaudubon.org. Thanks again and have a great night.
Thanks, Jen. Thanks, Scott.
Yeah, you're welcome.